So settling the body down. Noticing that your skin separates you from the rest of the world, at least as far as we normally think about it. See if you can relax what's underneath the skin and be receptive to what's outside of the skin. And the breath is both. The breath is what's in your body, but the breath is also all around you. You're swimming in breath. Letting your inhales hydrate and soften your lungs and your diaphragm. There's more space here than you thought. There's less to guard against than you thought. As you sit here breathing, seeing if you can just pay attention to the moment that the bell sounds and follow it until you can't hear it anymore. Now, one last time, see if you can do the same thing, but much more easily. Trust that your mind has got this. And with that, taking some deeper breaths. Making some small movements and without fully leaving a little quieter space, coming on back to the screen. All right. You all are seeing my screen, yeah? So continuing this trend of knowing the body of breath. And we can play with this idea that I mentioned of that we're swimming in breath. Breath isn't just what happens inside us, it's actually all around us. We're just like fish in the sea. All the air around us is our breath and it's others' breath. It's shared. A friend of mine used to say, we all share the same sky. Same thing. We all share the same breath, share the same air. So I'm going to rehash a little bit of what we talked about last week. And there's really these two concepts that we went over last week. And for my linguistic nerds, those concepts were vitakka and vicāra. And for those of us, most of us who are going to prefer that in English, it's applied attention and sustained attention. And I use this metaphor of paying attention to the moment that the bell rings. It's just applying, it's just this moment after moment after moment, or when we're counting, it's the moment of the count versus a smoother form of attention. And appropriately, I animated it to be faded in and smooth, and I'd forgotten about that. And you can see here, and this would be musical terms, legato, there's still multiple different notes. There's still multiple different notes here, but they're played smooth as if there's no differentiation between the two, maybe just little jumps in sound, but it's not little individual bits. These two actually work together. And one of the things that we talked about was, well, we related this a little bit to the counting. Last week we worked on the counting and we talked a little bit about that before we started the session formally today to just check in. And I heard mixed things. I heard some people mention beforehand, hey, the counting was great, it really settled my mind. I also heard from a few people that the counting feels kind of stressful and annoying. It's, it feels effortful, has an effortful quality to it. And both are true. I think it's a good reminder that this is the first step of a kind of, we could think of it as a 4-part practice, which is why we're doing this in 4 weeks. And so in this first step, it's just assumed that we're going to enter the meditation and our minds are all over the place. And a few people mentioned that the counting was really helpful for that. Your mind is all over the place and it kind of needs a little more hand holding because it's already jumping around in that kind of staccato fashion. It's already going from thing to thing to thing to thing. So you're saying, okay, we'll work with you at that level. We're going to go from one count to the next count to the next count to the next count. And I'm not going to give you so much of a chance to go all the way around. But that is both effortful and it can be relaxing if you get into it as well. But it is effortful. It's not as fun. It's not as smooth and flowy. And it can feel sometimes not as somatic, if that's what we're looking for, and if that feels settling, which is actually the direction that we're going. It can feel kind of heady. And actually, and I don't know if anybody's ever thought about this, but it's so interesting that counting the breath is often a meditation instruction. And we think, okay, I'm paying attention to my breath, but really you're paying attention to numbers in your own head. It's actually closer to like a mantra or something where you're saying something to yourself. And there's a lot of utility in that. I'm definitely a big fan of doing kind of mantra style practices because it kind of overrides all this kind of buzzing mind, but it's not this embodied piece. And that's what we're getting into this week. There's still a utility though of kind of warming the mind up, so to speak, or meeting it where it's at. And so that's this counting. I'm pulling out this reference to the sutta again, and I'll read it out loud. And I'm just pulling out the second part of it, because that's really what we'll be focusing on today. So there's this word Pīti. One trains themselves. I will breathe in sensitive to Pīti. One trains themselves I will breathe out sensitive to Pīti. We'll talk about that word in just a minute. We'll dive in. But there's a kind of shorter version of what I want to say about this passage. One trains himself, I will breathe in sensitive to pleasure. One trains himself, I will breathe out sensitive to pleasure. I like that it says pleasure. Actually, I don't think it's a very good translation of the word that it's referring to, and we'll talk about what that word is in a second too. But I love that it says pleasure because that is the overall encompassing orientation of this practice. We want to be really sensitive to pleasure and also displeasure and how both are coming up. And so even noticing that, let's say counting is effortful or something about the practice is not quite jiving, it's actually great noticing. That is an excellent practice opportunity in and of itself. So being sensitive to pleasure in its own way is also being sensitive to dis-ease or displeasure, what's not really working. One trains himself, I will breathe in and out sensitive to mental fabrication and calming mental fabrication. Okay, so why have I kept this in here? And before I talk about these different terms, what is this really about? Two things. One is this sensitivity to pleasure, which I just want to keep coming back to. We don't focus on this enough in our meditation practice. We think that we need to kind of beat our minds into submission or kind of like push them into the right place. And this is giving a very, very different feel. We're breathing in a caring, sweet way for our body. That is the orientation of this practice. Not even necessarily because we think, oh, I need to care for my body or that's the right thing. It's not even an ethical thing. Whatever you feel about that, which I do feel that we all deserve to care for our bodies. But this is actually saying this is the most effective way to meditate and to find some calm and ease, is to orient yourself towards pleasure and to get really good at noticing that in your body. It also happens to be a very useful skill outside of meditation practice. So sensitive to pleasure, and that sensitivity to pleasure helps you be aware of and calm this mental chatter. That's what's meant here by mental fabrication. All of these different stories and ideas that are built up and conceptions about the world, which are sometimes very obvious assumptions we make about other people or things, and sometimes they're very subtle, just assumptions that we make about our own experience from one moment to the next. This is much more effective doing this by being sensitive to our own body and what's feeling good and what's not feeling good. That is actually the route. That is the route. That is our North Star in this practice. So there's two terms. One of them was directly in there. The other one was actually translated. Pīti was in that last little text. And then the other word, which was translated as sukha, or as pleasure, is sukha. There is a beautiful, and I think this does better than anything else. So if you don't remember anything else, this metaphor for me just totally says it all. What is the metaphor? Now I need to make sure that I actually remember it and say it right. Okay, so Pīti and sukha are compared to a spring that bubbles up from the ground, a cool, refreshing, energetic, powerful spring, and it fills up a lake reservoir. So Pīti is this energy, it's this joy, it's this intensity that starts to emerge as we drop into practice and our mind gets quieter and it's like, oh man, this feels great. What? You mean there's a world where I'm not constantly looping in my own head? What a relief. And so Pīti is that moment. It has an energy and an excitement and an intensity to it. That's the spring that's welling up. And it's so important. And as it gathers, it starts to settle. So it doesn't keep kind of shooting up. It's settling and kind of filling up this space. So you get this upward movement. This is why it's such a beautiful metaphor. Pīti in the body often feels like this upward movement. People often feel it in their head or moving up their spine. And sometimes it can be very subtle. So, I'm hesitant to even say what it should feel like for you. Don't worry too much about, am I feeling it? Does it match up? Just be sensitive to pleasure and you will notice if these types of things are happening. And they don't happen every time. It's much useful to have a little bit of longer practice opportunities, 30 minutes, maybe even 40 minutes to really get this going a little bit. So Pīti is that spring that's bubbling up in our body. It's so refreshing, so sweet. And then sukha is as the spring fills up this reservoir. It's this more diffuse, wide open. You can't see my arms. They're like this. They're going out. It's this more diffuse, wide open, easeful experience. So it's sweet, it's contented. You could just bathe in this lake of sweetness. It's not this rising feeling, but it's this kind of spread out and open feeling. That's sukha. Sukha is often translated as happiness. Okay, another metaphor. These are my own metaphors, but I think the original one does much better. So Pīti is like lightning struck you. So it's like, wow, there's this intensity and it's sharp and it's beautiful and it's wow. And then sukha is like the rain falling and slowly soaking into the ground. And the ground is your body in this case. So just soaking it all up. Okay, another one. Pīti is like the moment of biting into a juicy, delicious fruit. And it's so exciting. It's like, this is so good. This first fresh peach of the summer. Just like, wow, this is brilliant. This is so sweet. And then you eat this whole peach, probably devour it, maybe a little bit too fast. And then you're kind of just sitting there cheesing afterwards. You're just like, wow, that was just great. I could just enjoy the memory of that for a while. So that's sukha. There's this contentedness that emerges. These don't happen every time, and they happen in little modicums, right? You might be looking for some spectacular, crazy, fantastic experience, but it's good to just be curious. Oh, is there some element of my experience that feels energetic and rising and intense? And is there something that feels more contented? Rather than thinking about them as kind of switches on and off, I think of them more as like faders. And you can pay attention to, oh, there's a little bit of contentedness there. Maybe if I pay a little more attention to it, I can just bring it up a little bit. Or there's a little bit of excitement there. I can just raise that a little bit with my attention. Okay, going through the different stages. So we did all these different lengths of breath. We'll work with those again today. Longest breath, the longer breath, which is not longer than the longest, so it could be a little confusing phrasing, but is longer than a normal breath. And then shorter, which is slightly shorter than a normal breath. That's a 3 count. And shortest, which is typically a 1 count, but everybody will figure out what count feels good for them. Today, we'll go into the following, where we'll drop those counts. No more counting, which will be a relief for some of you. And some of you will wish that you still had the count. And others of you will wish that the count would go away because you try to drop the count and it's still there. And you're like, I'm not supposed to be counting anymore. Stop it. So just to know that might happen. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just actually another type of thought. So you don't have to worry about engaging with it. You don't have to feel guilty or like you're doing it wrong. It's just interesting to notice, oh, the mind, it's still counting. It wants to be like Count Dracula from Sesame Street. It's Count Dracula, right? Yeah. That would have been a good one to happen here. Should have had a video of the count. So no worries if the count continues. Just kind of tune it out and tune into the pleasure of moving with the breath. One more thing to say about this. I am long-winded. One more thing to say about this is one thing that can help bring this counting stage into the body a little bit more is to count as if you're following the breath in and out. So you're kind of doing 2 things at once. You're following the breath on this count throughout your body, and you're also counting with it. And if that feels like it's going to be too much for those of you that the counting is working for, just ignore that I said that. And if you're feeling like the counting is kind of annoying and a little bit of a hassle, try that out. See if you can follow the breath into the body even as you're counting. So you're kind of doing 2 things at once a little bit. Final thing that I will share. This is just a delightful and delightfully titled uh, discourse from the kind of original Buddhist text. And it's about this specific monk, Sariputta. It's about his experience as he's doing a similar, probably not the same, but similar kind of breathing practice. And so what's said about him, secluded from the pushes and pulls of the body, secluded from unskillful qualities of mind, he entered and remained in the first absorption state, which has Pīti and sukha. We talked about those, the spring and the filling up of the reservoir. And those Pīti and sukha, they come from seclusion. They come from the mind not being so this and that about everything that's going on around them. But it requires this applying and sustaining attention. It requires some amount of effort. And so that's why we're kind of warming the mind up with the counting. Now, we might not get to this today, and you'll play around with this in your own experience over time. But I wanted to add this to just get a sense of the direction that we're going. Furthermore, as applying and sustaining attention were no longer necessary, he entered and remained in the second absorption, which has, it says rapture and bliss, which has Pīti and sukha, born of immersion with internal clarity and mind collected without needing to apply or sustain attention. So the source of the pleasure is a little bit different. The first kind of stage of practice is it feels good because your mind isn't so going this way and that and attaching to every little thing. The second stage, you're actually just really enjoying what you're doing, which is the practice itself. And you're enjoying what you're doing enough, and you can't will yourself into this. So don't try to top down will yourself into this. It just happens over time. You're enjoying what you're doing enough that you don't actually have to try to apply your attention anymore. The attention just balances on the object. You get in a flow state, essentially. You're literally flowing with the breath. You become the breath going in and out. People talk about becoming the breath. This would be an example of this kind of state. Just moving, flowing. You don't have to try to be there. So I only share that second piece because we have this tendency to think that we just have to keep trying harder to make things work. And it's good to apply some wise effort, especially as we're starting off with practice and the mind is a little more resistant. But really, the growth in practice comes from often from trying a little bit less or learning how to try a little bit less without totally losing it. It becomes like a balancing act. It becomes like a balancing act. Okay. Let's do a little bit of practice. So maybe if you like, I've been sitting for a little while, you can stand up and stretch for a moment. We'll just take a 30-minute little stretch break if you'd like it. We'll take a 30-second stretch break. If you come back in 30 minutes, probably won't be here anymore. Thank you. Okay, your 30 days are up. Let's practice. So I'll move into it on the quicker side because we already did a little bit of grounding practice. Let's just check in with our bodies for a moment. See what can be let go of. Feel that supposed barrier between inside and outside. shape of your body or your skin. Each moment finding little opportunities to settle the body even more. Be heavier, to give yourself a little more to the ground or the seat beneath you. Take in some deeper breaths, noticing that you're pulling breaths from the outside of your body, and that same breath is now inside of you. Same air, same air outside as inside. Deepening your breath a little bit, finding the longest comfortable breath. Very important word, comfortable breath. Feels uncomfortable, that means it's no longer the longest comfortable breath. It's longer. We'll begin with the longest of counting. As we inhale, breathing in the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And on the exhale, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Test out what it would feel like to be following the breath in all the way down to your tailbone as you inhale, and then following it out from your tailbone to your nose as you exhale. What would that feel like? How easeful you can make this. And let's shorten the breath to the longer of counting. Inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So just a little bit longer than quote unquote normal breath. You're also following the breath into and out of your body. Maybe this goes down to the bottom of the rib cage, not all the way down to the tailbone. Easeful as possible. Let's shorten that even further to the shorter of count. One, two, three, three, two. A little bit shorter than the average breath. And if you're following at the same time as counting, maybe this goes to the base of your neck, to the base of your throat. Making sure it's still comfortable, still getting enough air. You can slowly count down. You can take bigger breaths if you like. One, two, three, three, two. Think about almost rocking yourself to sleep, counting or hypnotizing yourself, rocking a baby, but with your breath inhaling and exhaling. We'll go to the shortest of counting. Inhaling one, exhaling one. You don't need to rush this one. Take the air that you need. Maybe if you're following, this breath goes through your nose, just into the back of your throat. Let it be comfortable. Slow it down if you need to. Take more air. One, and then dropping the count, just following the breath into the nose, to the back of the throat, back out. The shortest of following. Letting that attention be smooth and sweet and gentle, cherishing the breath flowing over these different parts of your insides. increasing the length to be the shorter of following. Breathing in a little more, maybe air goes from the tip of the nose to the bottom of the throat, base of the throat. Just a little less air than what you'd consider an average breath. Ever there's effort, even if it feels necessary for the practice, see if you can release it. Trust that the practice will continue. Mind of effort can only take you so far in this practice. Learn how to do without effort. Deepening a little more. So it's the longer following. Following the breath from the tip of the nose to the bottom of the rib cage. A little longer than a normal breath. Letting your breath bathe your insides. Least longest of following. Following your breath from the tip of the nose to the base of the spine. Longest comfortable breath. Just massaging your insides. Letting the breath flow from outside the body to inside the body to outside. Same breath, whether inside or outside. Just enjoying a few more moments of practice. Is there anything you could do to enjoy this a little bit more? Try to do it. Waiting for a few final breaths to the longest of counting. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, nine, eight, so on. As you're ready, you can return to normal breathing, but before you close your practice, taking a second to reflect on the last few minutes of your life and reflect with your whole body, not just your mind. What just happened? Anything that I would do again? Any moments of great dis-ease that are interesting to look at? Ready, you can begin to close your practice. And some deeper breaths and some small movements. Close the recording so that we can have a little bit of conversation.